May 19, 1944, Pacific Ocean north of the Solomon Islands. Night drapes itself over the sea like black silk. The stars shimmer faintly above the restless waves, and the wind hums across the steel hull of a lone warship, USS England, DE-635. Inside the destroyer escort, red lights cast a muted glow through the control room. The air smells of oil, sweat, and salt. The men speak in quiet tones, their movements sharp and practiced. The sonar operator leans forward, headphones pressed tight, listening for something only he can hear. A faint ping echoes back. Once, then again. A contact. Somewhere below in the darkness, a Japanese submarine is moving. The captain gives a calm nod. The engines shift. The ship turns hard to starboard, the crew springing into motion. The Hedgehog launchers, a new kind of anti-submarine weapon, are readied on deck. Each spigot holds a small warhead waiting for release. Outside, the sea rolls and heaves. Inside, a single order breaks the silence. Fire, a burst of sound. Dozens of projectiles arc into the blackness and vanish into the water. Seconds stretch into eternity. Then, a deep muffled explosion. Another, and another. The deck trembles. The sonar operator exhales, almost whispering. Contact lost. Below, 300 feet down, another Japanese submarine is torn apart. The USS England has struck again, her third kill in less than a week. And she is not done, because in the next 12 days, this modest American destroyer escort will achieve what no other ship in naval history ever has. She will sink 6 enemy submarines in under 2 weeks. The Pacific, 1944. A war at its boiling point by early 1944. The Pacific Ocean had become the largest battlefield in human history. Across tens of millions of square miles, ships hunted, planes patrolled, and submarines stalked each other beneath the waves. The once confident Imperial Japanese Navy, which had dominated the seas after Pearl Harbor, was now cornered and bleeding. Island by island, base by base, the Allies were clawing their way across the Pacific. The Solomons, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, each captured at a terrible cost. But beneath the surface, a different war raged. Japanese submarines, the I-boats, prowled the deep. They were longer, heavier, and slower than their German U-boat cousins, designed for long-range reconnaissance and attack. They hunted not convoys but capital ships, carriers, cruisers, troop transports. Japan's naval strategy had always focused on decisive fleet actions, the massive clashes of steel and fire. But as their empire crumbled, the submarines were tasked with desperate missions, supply runs, lone patrols, and suicide forays. By contrast, the United States Navy had learned the hard way that ignoring submarines could be fatal. In the Atlantic, German U-boats had nearly strangled Britain's lifeline. Convoys of cargo and troop ships had vanished beneath torpedo wakes. From that crucible, a new breed of vessel was born, small, agile, and relentless, the destroyer escort. The birth of a Hunter-class destroyer escorts were the unsung backbone of the Allied naval effort. They lacked the glamour of carriers or battleships, but they were indispensable. Where traditional destroyers were fast and heavily armed for fleet action, escorts were purpose-built for anti-submarine warfare. Shorter range, fewer guns, but powerful sonar, depth charges, and later, a secret weapon, the Hedgehog. Each destroyer escort carried roughly 200 men, cramped into a vessel just over 300 feet long. Life aboard was loud, wet, and exhausting. The decks rattled constantly and the smell of diesel clung to everything. Yet for all their discomfort, these ships represented cutting-edge naval adaptation, proof that the Allies could evolve faster than their enemies. By 1943, entire classes of these ships were rolling out of American shipyards every month. Among them was one destined for a brief but immortal legacy, USS England DE-635, a Buckley-class destroyer escort named after Ensign William Henry England, who had been killed at Pearl Harbor, USS England. A modest beginning, commissioned in December 1943, England was a young ship with a young crew. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander Charles Walton Williamson, was experienced but not yet famous. Most of his men were in their early 20s. Mechanics, radar operators, and gunners trained to operate in perfect coordination. They had practiced hundreds of simulated attacks, dropping depth charges against invisible targets. The ship's primary weapon, the Hedgehog, was revolutionary. Instead of dropping charges set to explode at depth, the Hedgehog fired a pattern of 24 small contact bombs that detonated only on impact. That meant crews could know instantly whether their target was hit and could avoid revealing their position with wasted blasts. It turned hunting into precision work, but technology alone would not make the England legendary. That would come from discipline, intuition, and an almost supernatural synchronization between her sonar operators, helmsmen, and gunners, men who trusted their instruments as much as their instincts. The threat below. Japan's submarine arm by 1944. Japan's once proud submarine fleet was in crisis. At the start of the war, Japanese I-boats had sunk Allied carriers and cruisers with shocking success. The USS Wasp, USS Yorktown, and many others had fallen victim to these deep-sea predators. But Japan had never developed an effective doctrine of submarine commerce rating, as Germany had. Their submarines were large and slow to dive, built for scouting ahead of battle fleets, not for sustained convoy warfare. By mid-1944, these disadvantages were fatal. Radar and sonar technology had turned the ocean from an opaque wilderness into a mapped hunting ground. Allied aircraft now patrolled with magnetic detectors. Surface ships could hear submarines moving even hundreds of feet below. Still, Japan persisted. Their submarines were sent to ferry supplies to cut off garrisons, intercept Allied task forces, and even plan one last decisive ambush. One such mission was the Operation AGO Reinforcement and Scouting Plan, a coordinated effort to protect the Marianas and the approach to the Philippines. And it was here, in the endless expanse of the South Pacific, that USS England would intercept them, one by one. Allied command, the importance of every escort at the time. The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet and 3rd Fleet were preparing for major offensives. Admirals Halsey and Nimitz were driving the final phase of island-hopping strategy. Every troop transport, every fuel ship, every carrier movement depended on safe passage. Losing even a handful of these vessels could stall operations for weeks. Destroyer escorts like England were the thin blue line holding the ocean lanes open. While carriers fought spectacular battles, these smaller ships endured a quieter, ceaseless duty, listening to the ocean, tracking unseen killers, and striking when chance and skill aligned. The Pacific was vast, but submarine contacts were rare and fleeting. One blip on the sonar screen could be a whale, a current, or death itself. Crews lived in that tension constantly. And in May 1944, that tension would erupt into an unprecedented streak of victories that stunned both friend and foe. Training for the impossible. The men of USS England had been forged in drills. They practiced anti-submarine attacks in formation with 2 other destroyer escorts, the USS George, DE-697, and USS Rabi, DE-698. Together they formed a hunter-killer team tasked with patrolling north of the Solomon Islands. Their job seemed straightforward: protect convoys and respond to intelligence reports of enemy submarines. But no one expected what was coming. Training made them methodical. When a sonar contact appeared, every man knew his role. The sonar operator would track bearings. The captain would calculate a firing run. The Hedgehog crew would load, aim, and fire in under 30 seconds. There was no room for hesitation. They were a crew that operated like a single organism. And that unity, more than any weapon, would soon define them. The first contact began quietly on May 18, 1944. Allied intelligence had intercepted Japanese radio transmissions, submarine positions, sent through the broken JN-25 code. The U.S. Navy now had approximate coordinates for several enemy submarines operating near Bougainville. England, George, and Rabi were dispatched to investigate. At 1:25 a.m., England's sonar picked up a faint echo. The ship closed in. The Hedgehog system was armed. The first salvo missed. The second salvo hit. Within minutes, Japanese submarine I-16 was gone, destroyed in a boiling underwater eruption. The men aboard England cheered softly, more in disbelief than triumph. It was the ship's first confirmed kill. They marked it with a small painted submarine silhouette on the bridge. No one imagined 5 more would follow. The sea, however, offered no time for celebration. The very next day, another radio intercept reported a new contact nearby. The same formation moved to engage. Once again, England's sonar sang, and once again her Hedgehog struck true. A second submarine, RO-106, was destroyed. In less than 48 hours, the USS England had done what most ships never achieved in an entire campaign. But fate and Japanese desperation were not finished with her yet. The next 12 days would turn this modest escort into a legend whispered across every naval wardroom from Pearl Harbor to Leyte Gulf. The story of USS England's 2-week odyssey now stood at its threshold. 6 submarines waiting in the shadows of the Pacific, and a crew determined to hunt them all. The Solomons and the Shadow War beneath. By the spring of 1944, the Solomon Islands chain was a graveyard of sunken ships and twisted wreckage. Once the centerpiece of Japan's southern perimeter, the region had become an Allied stronghold. Yet even after losing Guadalcanal, Japan clung to the hope of using the nearby deepwater routes as transit corridors for submarines and supply convoys. The geography itself made it treacherous. The narrow channels between Bougainville, New Britain, and New Ireland offered natural cover for submarines slipping between the Coral Sea and the open Pacific. Beneath those waters lay hundreds of Allied aircraft and ships, haunting reminders of the earlier, brutal fighting. But by May 1944, the battle had shifted north. The Allies were preparing to seize the Marianas, a move that would bring Tokyo within range of B-29 bombers. The Japanese High Command knew this was the beginning of the end, and their submarines were called upon for one final mission: to track, shadow, and attack Allied task forces converging toward Saipan. The Japanese mission, Operation Ego, was Admiral Somu Toyoda's desperate plan to halt the advancing U.S. Navy through a decisive carrier engagement. To prepare for it, Japan needed accurate reconnaissance of Allied movements, particularly any large fleets assembling for invasion. To achieve this, a line of submarines, from I-16 to RO-116, was deployed along a vast north-south screen stretching east of New Ireland. Their task was simple in theory but perilous in practice: report sightings, avoid combat, and survive long enough to deliver intelligence. But Allied cryptographers at Pearl Harbor were listening. Through the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, FRUPAC, U.S. intelligence had already decrypted the new Japanese dispatches. They knew the pattern, the timing, and even the patrol zones of the submarines heading out. Each I-boat's route was now a thread the Allies could pull, and the hunter assigned to tug that thread was USS England. The hunter-killer team, coordination, and precision. England operated not alone, but in concert with 2 other destroyer escorts, USS Raby and USS George. Together they formed a small yet deadly formation under the command of Captain Walton Williamson, following the doctrine of hunter-killer coordination perfected in the Atlantic. Their operations relied on precise synchronization. Each ship's sonar created a 3-point triangulation grid, narrowing a submarine's position to within hundreds of yards. Once contact was solid, the lead ship, often England, would break formation, sprint ahead, and execute an attack run while the others maintained sonar lock. It was a ballet of steel and mathematics. Each second mattered. A misjudged turn, a premature depth charge, and the submarine could slip away forever. Yet the Pacific was vast. To even find a submarine required both patience and uncanny intuition. Many crews spent weeks on patrol without a single confirmed contact. For England's crew, that reality was about to change. The submarines of the Empire. The submarines England would face were not uniform. The Imperial Japanese Navy fielded a diverse fleet, large Type B and C boats built for long-range operations, and smaller RO-class boats intended for regional patrols, I-16. The first destroyed by England was a massive Type C1 boat, 356 feet long and armed with 6 forward torpedo tubes. She had previously been involved in supply runs to Guadalcanal, RO-106. The second victim was part of the smaller RO-100 class, shorter, faster diving but limited in endurance RO-104, Aero-116, and RO-108 would follow in quick succession. Each submarine carried around 50 to 70 men, sailors who knew that odds of returning home were vanishing by 1944. Fuel shortages, poor communication, and radar-equipped enemy aircraft had turned every patrol into a slow death sentence. Many Japanese submariners had begun to view their missions as one-way voyages. They sailed under orders that were increasingly detached from reality, to intercept enemy fleets that had already moved, to resupply outposts already lost, to sacrifice themselves for propaganda victories that never came. Technology changes the hunt at. The heart of this deadly contest was technology. World War II's naval combat had become a war of sound and signal. Radar pulses above, sonar pings below. The England sonar, the QGB active sound system, could detect a submerged submarine's hull by bouncing sound waves off it and measuring the echo's delay. But the breakthrough was not in detection, and it was in destruction. The Hedgehog projector installed on England's forecastle allowed for a new kind of engagement. Unlike traditional depth charges that detonated at preset depths and risked losing contact in the explosion's turbulence, Hedgehog bombs would only explode upon direct impact. This gave the attacking ship instant feedback, either silence or the unmistakable crump of contact hits. The crew trained tirelessly to synchronize sonar bearings with Hedgehog launches. The process demanded nerves of steel. The ship had to steer straight toward the target, predicting where the submarine would be rather than where it was. The Hedgehog fired forward, forming an oval-shaped pattern of explosives. It was a weapon of precision, and when combined with radar tracking and disciplined crews, it became the deadliest anti-submarine system of its time. The Japanese had no countermeasure that could match it. A war of nerves and endurance life aboard England was relentless. The ship operated in constant 4-hour shifts. Sonar men rarely slept more than 2 or 3 hours at a time. The Pacific heat turned cabins into ovens. The smell of oil and salt never left their clothes. Every man knew that at any moment a torpedo could appear out of nowhere, streaking silently toward their hull. Meals were eaten standing up. Coffee replaced sleep. Letters from home arrived sporadically, often weeks old. Yet morale remained high. The crew believed in their ship, in their training, their officers, and their mission. When a contact appeared, everything changed. Silence fell over the deck. Every heartbeat aligned to the rhythm of the sonar pings. Steady, steady. Firing run. Then came the thud of Hedgehogs, the seconds of waiting, and the distant roar beneath the waves. It was nerve warfare. A battle fought not face to face, but through echoes in the dark. The code breakers. Behind the scenes, behind England's streak, stood another silent force, the Allied cryptographers. Working from Pearl Harbor and Brisbane, codebreakers of the Fleet Radio Unit Melbourne, Frumel, and Frupak had penetrated Japan's naval cipher. They could read submarine deployment orders sometimes within hours of their transmission. Each decoded message provided coordinates, headings, and estimated arrival times. These were relayed through Admiral Halsey's command to destroyer escort groups patrolling key corridors. Thus, England's victories were not accidents of luck. They were the convergence of intelligence, technology, and human execution. The cryptographers found the prey. The sailors delivered the strike. For every explosion beneath the Pacific, there had been first a burst of dots and dashes on a cryptographer's console thousands of miles away. The enemy's perspective. Isolation and despair inside the cramped hulls of Japanese submarines. The story was very different. By 1944, the Imperial Navy's submarine crews were suffering from malnutrition, exhaustion, and despair. The loss of bases like Truk and Rabaul had crippled supply lines. Spare parts were scarce. Radar detectors were outdated. Many submarine commanders operated on obsolete intelligence, unaware that their coded messages were compromised. When England appeared on their sonar screens, they assumed coincidence, not orchestration. In the Japanese naval ethos, to fail one's mission was to die with honor. There were no surrender protocols, no rescue expectations. Submariners went to sea expecting not to return. Each crew knew the statistics, and by 1945, over 130 Japanese submarines would be lost, many without survivors. The ocean became their grave, unmarked and infinite. The calm before the storm as May 1944 entered its final week. The hunter-killer group led by England continued sweeping northward. Every evening the sea shimmered with tropical starlight. Every morning the sonar men resumed their listening. Each success brought new tension, not relief. For every submarine destroyed, another waited beyond the horizon. The crew's bodies were exhausted, but their minds razor-focused. They had become what the Navy called sub-chasers, a term that carried both respect and unease. To hunt submarines was to confront an unseen enemy, one that could strike or vanish without trace. And yet, as the final days of May arrived, England's sonar operators would once again hear that haunting echo. A blip on the scope. Another contact. Another dance of life and death about to begin. By the end of this quiet, merciless campaign, USS England would do what no ship before or since has repeated: sink 6 enemy submarines in 12 days, rewriting naval warfare history forever. And as the days unfolded, every angle of that achievement, from human endurance to technological innovation, would reveal how one modest American ship became a legend beneath the waves. Steel nerves in a steel hull. The men aboard USS England were young, hardened by months at sea, and united by one purpose: survival through precision. In photographs from that spring of 1944, their faces reveal a paradox: calm eyes, weary smiles, and an alertness that never fades. They were sailors, technicians, listeners of the deep, men whose job was to strike an enemy they would never see. Daily life aboard England was measured in watches: 4 hours on duty, 4 off, a rhythm broken only by alarms. The Pacific sun beat down relentlessly, cooking the metal decks. Below, temperatures in the engine room soared above 100 degrees. Every surface vibrated from the engines. Every corridor echoed with the hum of machinery. The crew slept in hammocks stacked above torpedo reloads, heads inches from steel bulkheads. Showers were short and salty. Fresh water was precious. Meals were mostly canned meat, coffee, and the occasional miracle of fresh bread. Yet amid the discomfort there was pride. They were the guardians of the fleet, the unseen line between safety and disaster. And as word of their early successes spread through radio channels, morale soared, tempered with disbelief. But confidence could be dangerous. The Pacific offered no second chances. Moments before contact, every anti-submarine attack began with silence. When a sonar ping returned a faint echo, the room would freeze. The sound man, often the most crucial man aboard, would call out bearing and range in measured tones. He couldn't see the enemy. He heard him through the subtlest shifts in echo frequency. Contact bearing 173. Range 1,800 yards. Each word meant life or death. The captain, standing over the plotting table, traced the submarine's estimated path with a grease pencil. The helmsman adjusted course, the engines roared, and depth charges were readied. Above deck, the Hedgehog crews locked into their stations, 24 bombs loaded, safeties off. At those moments, the entire ship became one heartbeat. No one spoke unless ordered. The men felt the vibrations through their boots, a steady hum of anticipation. When the order, fire, came, it was a controlled thunderclap. The Hedgehog spigots erupted, the bombs arcing gracefully before vanishing beneath the waves. Then came waiting, the longest 15 seconds in naval warfare. Sometimes there was only silence. Other times a deep explosion rolled through the hull, followed by another and another. Confirmation that death had found its mark hundreds of feet below. The men never saw the wreckage. They simply recorded a kill, painted another submarine silhouette on the bridge, and returned to their watch rotations. But the knowledge weighed on them. 50, 70 men, gone in seconds, swallowed by the Pacific. No survivors, no wrecks, just oil and silence. That was the rhythm of the hunt. Discipline and trust. Success aboard England depended on one thing: trust. The captain trusted his sonar men to interpret the echoes correctly. The gunners trusted the officers to calculate range and bearing. The crew trusted the ship to survive counterattack. Even the smallest hesitation could cost lives. When a submarine fired a torpedo, the crew had less than 30 seconds to react. Training had drilled them into instinctive motion. Engines to flank, rudder hard over, depth charges ready. In the wardroom, between attacks, they played cards, wrote letters, and joked. Not because life was easy, but because humor was a shield. Every man aboard knew of ships that had disappeared without a trace. In the Pacific, a single lucky shot could erase years of discipline. Captain Williamson was known for his calmness. He didn't shout. He directed. His second-in-command, Lieutenant J.G. John Williamson, handled attack coordination, his voice steady over the intercom. Together they formed the tactical brain of England. Their leadership was not theatrical. It was procedural, precise, almost surgical. They knew that mastery of the invisible required control of the self, and that calm professionalism would carry England through the most relentless series of engagements ever recorded. By a single ship, the tactical angle, the art of submarine hunting. To understand England's feat, one must grasp the science of tracking an unseen enemy. Submarine hunting in 1944 was not guesswork. It was geometry. A submarine was rarely visible, even with radar. Once submerged, it vanished from sight. The only clue was sound, the faint pulse of propellers, the reverberation of hull plates under pressure. Sonar operators listened through hydrophones, translating echoes into data. They would mark each return ping on a chart, calculating relative motion. The ship's helm adjusted to keep the contact centered. Over time, a pattern emerged, a ghostly track of the submarine's movement. Attacking required closing to within 1,000 yards, dangerously close. The ship had to predict where the submarine would be in 30 seconds, compensating for speed, depth, and evasion maneuvers. The attack run demanded flawless timing. Once the Hedgehogs fired, England had to pass directly over the target's last known position, hoping the bombs met their mark before the submarine slipped away. Each Hedgehog carried 35 pounds of high explosive. When one struck, the result was catastrophic. The submarine's pressure hull would buckle, instruments would shatter, and compartments would flood in seconds. But missing was easy. The Pacific's underwater terrain often distorted sonar echoes. Temperature layers could deflect sound waves. False contacts, schools of fish, debris, even underwater ridges, could deceive the operators. That England succeeded not once but 6 times in succession meant near-perfect execution, a combination of training, intuition, and endurance unmatched in naval records. The psychology of the Hunt submarine warfare was psychological chess. A submerged boat could stay hidden for hours, even days, waiting for its pursuers to give up. Patience became a weapon. Many destroyers failed to finish their kills simply because fatigue and doubt set in. On England, that hesitation never appeared. The crew trusted their sonar's truth. If an echo remained, they hunted until it vanished in explosion or silence. When England engaged her third target, RO-104, the submarine dove deep, weaving through thermal layers to confuse sonar. The crew tracked her for over 5 hours, a duel of endurance fought through sound alone. The Hedgehogs fired twice, missing both times. Most ships would have moved on. Williamson ordered another pass. The third salvo hit. 3 explosions. Then a rush of bubbles and oil. Persistence had triumphed over fatigue. That was the tactical spirit of England. No rush, no retreat. No guesswork, only discipline and mathematics repeated until victory. The technological angle. Innovation beneath the waves. World War II transformed technology faster than any era before it. Between 1939 and 1945, naval warfare advanced more than it had in the previous century. The destroyer escort embodied this revolution, compact, automated, and data-driven. England's machinery represented the cutting edge of Allied naval science. Radar, surface search, detected submarine periscopes or snorkels breaking the water. Sonar, ASDIC QGB, mapped the underwater battlefield in real time. Hedgehog launchers replaced guesswork with targeted destruction. Depth charges, secondary weapons for wide-area attacks, HF, DF. Radio direction, finding triangulated Japanese transmissions before contact. Each system fed into the ship's tactical center, a small plotting room filled with grease boards, headphones, and red light. Here, operators combined radar data with sonar bearings to predict enemy movement. The integration was primitive by modern standards, but revolutionary in 1944. Every destroyer escort was effectively a floating sensor network, and England's crew knew how to wield it. The Hedgehog, in particular, was the game changer. Developed by British engineers in 1941, it addressed one of anti-submarine warfare's greatest flaws. Traditional depth charges required ships to pass directly over their targets, losing sonar contact during the attack. The Hedgehog, firing forward, allowed constant contact until impact. It also minimized waste. Since only direct hits exploded, there was no confusion between a missed charge and a kill. In England's campaign, the Hedgehog proved its worth beyond all expectation. Every confirmed submarine kill came through hedgehog hits, none through depth charges. Sound, the invisible battlefield. The Pacific Ocean was a symphony of noise. Rain on the surface, distant thunder, propeller hums, snapping shrimp, all combined to create a constant acoustic fog. Sonar operators learned to distinguish the faint rhythm of a submarine's propellers from this chaos. They could tell by sound alone whether a submarine was turning, diving, or surfacing. Some could even estimate class and size by the spacing of propeller beats. To these men, the sea was not dark. It was alive with echoes. Their skill was a form of music, deadly, precise, and invisible. It was said that on England the sonar operators barely slept during the 12-day hunt. They drank coffee by the gallon, kept their headphones on even during brief breaks, and logged every anomaly. When one operator reported a faint new contact on May 22nd, his accuracy was so absolute that within hours, RO-116 lay shattered on the seafloor. The crew later joked that their sonar men heard ghosts and hit them anyway. But behind the humor was respect and awe, integration of man and machine. The success of England symbolized the evolution of warfare, the fusion of human instinct and machine precision. Every hedgehog kill represented thousands of small calibrations. Sonar bearings, helm adjustments, firing angles, and timing measured to fractions of a second. This symbiosis, the crew trusting the instruments extending human senses, marked a turning point in naval history. From this era onward, wars would be fought less by sight and more by signal. England's achievements were not a fluke. They were the product of doctrine, data, and human will working in harmony. When the war ended, historians would call her campaign the ultimate validation of destroyer escort design. But for the men aboard, it was never about glory. It was about duty, and the simple, unspoken pride of doing their job perfectly again and again, against impossible odds. As England prepared to face her 4th and 5th submarine contacts, the crew no longer doubted their capabilities. They were tired, blistered, and sleepless, but their confidence was absolute. Each echo was now a promise. Each explosion a certainty. The Pacific had become their chessboard, and they were winning. War stories often honor victors, but beneath England's trail of triumphs lay 6 shattered Japanese submarines, each with its own crew, orders, and fragments of human hope now silenced beneath the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Navy's submariners were among the most disciplined in the world. They trained for years, mastering navigation and silent running under the Emperor's code of absolute loyalty. When England began her hunt in May 1944, the Japanese were desperate to stem the Allied advance toward the Marianas. Their mission orders were simple: intercept and destroy Allied reinforcements. The submarines of that mission, RO-106, RO-104, RO-106, RO-108, RO-105, and I-16, formed part of a communication and ambush line stretching hundreds of miles. They expected to strike vulnerable transports. Instead, they met a destroyer escort that could see without sight and strike without warning. A glimpse into the other side inside those Japanese submarines, life was even harsher than aboard England. The air was foul within hours of diving. Condensation dripped constantly from the ceiling, soaking bunks and uniforms. Diesel fumes hung thick, mixing with sweat and oil. Space was so tight that men slept between torpedoes or alongside batteries that hissed acid vapor. Meals were cold rice and pickles. Water was rationed. Some sailors carried good luck charms, family photos, folded prayer slips, or miniature flags signed by loved ones. They knew that once submerged under attack, rescue was impossible. If hit, the sea would crush the hull before a distress signal could be sent. When sonar pings echoed through the steel, the telltale sound of England closing in, many would have known their fate was sealed. The Hedgehog's quiet entry into the water gave no warning. Only the explosion announced death. There were no survivors from England's 6 kills. Silence as a weapon in Japanese doctrine. Submarines were meant to operate as lone hunters, silent, patient, and self-reliant. But in 1944, Allied technology had turned silence against them. Every radio message, every transmission to headquarters became a potential beacon for HFDF tracking. Thus, Japan's undersea fleet fought blind, often unaware that their communications betrayed them. By the time England detected RO-106 through radio triangulation, the submarine's crew had no idea they were being stalked. Hours later, their hull was torn apart by hedgehog blasts, the beginning of England's 12-day reign. The Japanese Naval Command, desperate and disbelieving, sent new subs one after another to find the destroyer. Each one, in turn, vanished. By the time I-16, a large supply submarine, disappeared on May 31st, the line of 6 boats had been completely erased. The Imperial Navy only realized this weeks later, when no further reports came home. In Tokyo, the loss was incomprehensible. 6 submarines meant over 350 trained men, years of shipyard labor and irreplaceable experience, gone. To the Japanese, England was not a ship. It was a phantom, a curse beneath the sea. The leadership angle. Calm command in chaos. The success of England was not merely mechanical or tactical, it was philosophical. Leadership aboard her decks reflected a quiet confidence rarely seen in wartime. Lieutenant Commander C.W. Williamson was not the loud or dramatic kind of leader often immortalized in films. He led by example with precision and composure. He trusted his officers fully and never overruled expertise. When the sonar team spoke, he listened. When they erred, he corrected gently but decisively. His crew later recalled that his calm voice over the intercom was what kept them anchored. In the chaos of depth charge explosions and evasive maneuvers, that steadiness meant everything. Beneath him, Lieutenant J.G. John Williamson, no relation, served as attack officer. It was his coordination, timing, and intuitive reading of sonar that defined the attack sequences. The 2 men, though sharing a surname, operated in perfect synchronization, one commanding the ship, the other the kill. Their teamwork became legend within the fleet. So precise were their decisions that fellow officers joked England could hunt blindfolded. But their success never bred arrogance. Williamson's personal logs reveal a man deeply aware of war's cost. After their 4th kill, he wrote simply, "Another gone. The sea gives nothing back." That entry, stark and quiet, reveals more than pages of technical data. It reveals empathy and exhaustion. The moral angle, glory, guilt, and legacy. Every confirmed kill brought celebration, briefly. The ship's cook would serve something special. The men would cheer, and another silhouette would be painted under the bridge. But beneath the ritual, something unspoken lingered. Submarine warfare offered no witnesses. The men they killed were unseen, unrecognizable, just a column of bubbles and oil. There were no faces, no wreckage, no proof except the silence that followed. Some called it clean war, impersonal, efficient. Others knew better. A few crewmen later admitted they avoided looking over the side after attacks, not wanting to see the oil slicks drifting by. In later interviews, one sailor put it bluntly, "You tell yourself, it's them or us." But after 6 times, it starts to sound hollow. This was the hidden burden of precision warfare, the realization that perfection leaves no survivors. England's achievement would enter history as unmatched. But for her crew, the weight of what they had done endured quietly, unspoken. From hunt to history after May 1944, England returned to port a legend. Her record, 6 submarines in 12 days go, became immortalized in U.S. Navy training manuals. Admiral Ernest J. King himself issued the order, "There will always be an England in the United States Navy." And there was. 3 future ships bore her name. Each carried the legacy not of triumph alone, but of excellence under pressure, human and mechanical unity, and the moral complexity of modern war. The original England would later be sunk in 1945 by a Japanese kamikaze off Okinawa, a poetic symmetry that neither her crew nor history could ignore. The hunter had become the hunted, but by then her place in history was secured. In an ocean measured in miles and deaths, England had proven that precision, teamwork, and quiet courage could alter the shape of war. Echoes beyond the Pacific long after the war ended, sonar evolved into digital sensors and hedgehogs gave way to guided torpedoes. But the principles England embodied, discipline, trust, and calm mastery of the invisible, remained foundational to naval warfare. Today, when modern anti-submarine crews train, they still study her attack patterns. Each strike is a case study in coordination, timing, and restraint. The Ghost of England sails silently through naval doctrine, reminding every sailor that technology without composure is chaos, and composure without teamwork is nothing. Her story endures not as myth, but as blueprint. The First Contact, RO 106, May 18, 1944. The Solomon Sea stretches out in silence. USS England sails as part of Task Group 30.4, assigned to protect convoys and hunt Japanese submarines threatening Allied routes to the Marianas. At 1:25 a.m., the ship's radar picks up a faint echo. Moments later, sonar confirms it, a submarine moving slowly north at periscope depth. Lieutenant J.G. John Williamson leans over the plotting board. His pencil draws a clean arc, the enemy's predicted course. Range decreasing, reports the sonar man, his voice flat but tense. The first run begins. The destroyer escort turns hard, engines roaring. Hedgehog launchers are armed, 24 bombs primed to explode on impact, not depth. The ship rolls with the sea. Fire. The Hedgehogs burst forward. A brief silence, then a deep, muffled thunder. 1, 2, 3, multiple detonations. The sonar screen flashes, then goes dead. Contact lost. Seconds later, an oil slick surfaces. Debris follows. Wood, insulation, fragments of metal. At 2:45 a.m., RO 106 is gone. In the darkened CIC Combat Information Center, no one cheers. Just nods, quiet acknowledgments, and a return to watch stations. It's only been a few hours since sunset. There will be more pings before dawn. The second kill, RO 104. The following night, May 19th, the ocean again reveals its secret. Another sonar contact, this time deeper, RO 104. The Japanese submarine had been transmitting position updates to coordinate with the rest of the defensive line. Unaware that U.S. intelligence had intercepted those signals, it was now sailing straight into England's path. The crew acts as one body. Depth bearing angle, called out like heartbeat rhythms. Fire 1. The ship lurches. Hedgehog rounds arc into the black water. 20 seconds of silence, then a rolling explosion that shakes the deck. A column of white foam erupts amid the waves. Debris breaks the surface. Another contact disappears forever. The log entry reads simply, RO 104 sunk. 3D-32S, 156-30E. 2 attacks, second successful. 2 submarines in 2 nights. A pattern has begun. Methodical, relentless, almost surgical. RO 1-16, the third hunt. 3 days later, May 22nd, the crew of England runs on little sleep. The air below decks feels heavy with diesel and tension. At 6:10 p.m., radar contact, another submarine surfacing briefly before diving again. Sonar locks on. The submarine is RO 116, moving at 5 knots, 100 feet deep. The first attack run misses. The second finds its mark. 16, Hedgehog bombs plunge into the water, and within seconds, 4 detonations crack through the hull. Observers report oil, debris, and air bubbles spreading rapidly. A clear sign of destruction below. 3 in 4 days. The sea grows quieter, but England's reputation spreads through the fleet. By now, Allied command is tracking her every report. The tone in dispatches shifts from routine to reverent. Destroyer escorts are suddenly not just convoy guardians, they are hunters. A pattern recognized, the Japanese response, the Imperial Japanese Navy, alarmed by the sudden loss of 3 submarines, responds quickly. From truck, orders are sent. New boats are to locate and destroy the enemy destroyer responsible. Among them are RO 108, RO 105, and the larger supply submarine I-16, but their communications betray them again. Each encoded message sent back to headquarters gives Allied HFDF stations another fix. In Pearl Harbor and Espiritu Santo, analysts chart the pattern. In less than a week, they realize England is positioned almost perfectly to intercept the next wave. The trap tightens, unseen. Silent mathematical, DARO 108. The fourth submarine, May 23, 1944. The morning light shimmers over calm seas near the Bismarck archipelago. England receives coordinates from a nearby destroyer escort, USS George, reporting a possible submarine contact. England turns toward the coordinates. Sonar begins to hum. At 7:36 a.m., the contact is solid. The Japanese submarine RO-108 has surfaced briefly and dived again to evade aircraft. The ship's course tightens. The pattern begins. Sonar reports, speed adjustments, firing solutions. Fire. The first volley misses. The second lands. 5 hedgehog explosions ripple through the water. The soundmen wait. Then, contact lost. A broad patch of oil spreads across the surface. No survivors. At 8:14 a.m., England's 4th victory is confirmed. In the wardroom, there are no cheers, but only exhaustion. The men eat silently, heads down. They know they've done what few others could. But they also know the sea is far from empty. The weight of success. By this point, the USS England had logged over 120 hours of continuous combat readiness. No port, no resupply, no real rest. Her captain noted in his report. Crew performance remains beyond expectation. Physical exhaustion visible, morale intact. For the men, every sonar ping carried the same weight. Life or death compressed into seconds. The ship was now famous among Allied fleets and feared by the enemy. But 2 more submarines remained. And the final hunts would test everything, from endurance to precision. The ocean, indifferent and endless, waited for the next echo. May 24-26. 1944, the 5th hunt begins. The sea had turned rough. By the morning of May 24th, dark clouds pressed low over the Pacific. England's decks were slick with rain, her crew soaked but alert. The sonar room hummed with steady tension. At 8 a.m., a coded message arrived from Allied command. A new submarine contact, RO-105, last reported west of Bougainville. It was the most senior boat in the line, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Fukumura. 3 destroyer escorts, England, George, and Raby, were ordered to pursue. What followed would become one of the most complex coordinated submarine hunts of the war. The hunt for RO-105 all day, the ships swept the search area. Sonar pings rose and fell with the rhythm of the sea. At 2:40 p.m., Raby reported a faint echo. England and George closed in, forming a triangle of steel around the suspected position. At 2:54 p.m., the sonar man aboard England called out, "Contact firm, bearing 132, range 1,800 yards." John Williamson immediately took control of the attack run. The destroyer turned into the swell. Hedgehog launchers locked into firing angle. Fire 1. The first salvo missed. The second, 24 projectiles, arced through the rain and vanished beneath the waves. Seconds stretched. Then 6 explosions tore through the sea, echoing across all 3 ships. The sonar screen went blank at 3:09 p.m. Oil and debris surfaced, unmistakable signs of destruction. RO-105 was gone. Fukumura and his 54 men would never be found. Recognition. Across the fleet, when England's radio operator transmitted the coordinates and confirmation, the response from command was immediate and almost reverent. "Excellent work. Maintain patrol. You are writing history." By then, 5 submarines had been sunk in just 7 days. No other ship in history, not even a fleet destroyer or aircraft carrier, had ever achieved such a record. But the ocean held one final test. A giant unlike the others, the 6th and final kill, by 16 May 31, 1944, south of the Admiralty Islands. The day dawned pale and calm. The air carried the smell of salt and diesel. The England, battered but unbroken, continued patrol with her 2 sister ships. At dawn, the destroyer Hazelwood reported a sinking transport convoy nearby. Japanese supply lines had been severed, and one of the submarines believed responsible was still in the area. By 6 a.m., Allied cryptographers decoded an intercepted Japanese message. It mentioned I-16, a large I-class supply submarine en route to evacuate stranded personnel from Buka. Her last transmission pinpointed her within striking range of England's patrol zone. The approach at 7:35 a.m. Sonar contact, faint, deep. The operator leaned forward, adjusting the gain. The blip reappeared, steady, moving southeast. This was no small target. The I-16 displaced over 2,000 tons, twice the size of previous kills. Williamson plotted the approach. Bearing 118, range 2,100 yards. Speed estimated 4 knots. The crew took stations. Rain misted the deck. The ship rolled slightly with the swells. Engines throttled down. Quiet, deliberate. Fire. The Hedgehog streaked forward, a flurry of arcs cutting through fog and wind. 10 seconds, 15, then a thunderous eruption. The entire sea convulsed. The sonar room crackled with static. Within minutes, a dark stain spread across the water. Fragments of wood, oil, and rubber drifted to the surface. I-16 was gone. 12 days. 6 submarines in just 12 days. From May 18 to May 31, 1944. The USS England had hunted and destroyed 6 Japanese submarines, RO-106, May 18 RO-104, May 19 RO-116, May 22 RO-108, May 23 RO-105, May 26 I-16, May 31. Each kill confirmed by wreckage, oil, or radio silence. Each attack executed with precision, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Her success forced Japanese command to abandon their entire submarine supply network across the Solomons, a devastating blow to logistics and morale. The message heard. Around the Pacific that afternoon, a brief, factual signal left the England's radio room. No pride, no exaggeration, just truth. 6 enemy submarines destroyed. Mission complete. At Allied Command Headquarters, the message spread through officers' corridors like fire. Admiral King himself read it twice before smiling quietly. 6 in 12 days, he murmured. There will always be an England in the United States Navy. The ship's log closed the page for May 31st with a simple entry. Patrol continues. Crew fatigued but steady. Equipment operational. No casualties. The moment of stillness that night as England cut through calm seas, no one spoke much. The engines throbbed low and constant, the sky faintly silver with moonlight. In the mess, coffee steamed in tin cups. Men leaned on tables, eyes heavy. Outside, the Pacific was quiet again. No sonar pings, no echoes, just silence. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, the destroyer escort was alone with its thoughts. 6 submarines. Hundreds of men lost. One small ship, unchanged in design, transformed by legend. The commander wrote his final operational note for the mission. The ship and crew have performed beyond expectation. Results speak for themselves. The cost, immeasurable but necessary. The ocean absorbed those words, as it had absorbed everything else. That silence, that final calm after 12 days of hunting, marks the close of England's most extraordinary chapter. But victory on the sea always comes with echoes that never fade. The morning of May 16, 1944, dawned gray and tense. The USS England cut through the Pacific, its engines humming beneath the rolling clouds. Rain lashed the decks, but the crew barely noticed anymore. By now, hunting submarines was second nature. At 05:20 hours, sonar picked up a faint contact. The operator called out. A potential sub bearing 220 degrees, range 2,000 yards. Captain Bill Pendleton leaned over the plotting table, eyes calm, voice steady. Let's check it. Come around slow. Keep the contact steady. Within minutes, the sonar trace firmed into a recognizable pattern, a submerged target moving at low speed. The England had found another one. This time it was RO-105, a Japanese submarine that had recently left Truk. The Imperial Japanese Navy had dispatched her to act as an advance scout for a small picket line meant to warn of Allied movements. RO-105 never realized she was walking into a storm of steel. The destroyer escort adjusted course, moving deliberately into position. Depth charge crews took their stations. The Hedgehog crews armed the spigot mortars. Pendleton's ship had become an instrument honed to perfection. Every man aboard now knew his role by instinct. At 0800 hours, England released her first attack pattern. 24 Hedgehog bombs arced out over the bow, whistling faintly before splashing down. Seconds later, a chain of underwater detonations. Then a roar louder than thunder. A column of water shot up, black and violent. Oil bubbled to the surface. Debris floated in the foam. RO-105 was gone, annihilated in a single strike. That made 5 submarines in 9 days. The sea was becoming quiet again, but not for long. Intelligence still indicated another contact, RO-108, possibly operating west of Bougainville. The destroyer escort trio, England, George, and Robbie, received new orders. Hunt it down. Finish the job. They moved swiftly following intelligence intercepts. Cryptographic work by Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, FRUPAC, had proven essential. The Americans were now reading Japanese submarine communications almost in real time. By May 18th, the destroyers reached the area. The air was heavy with humidity, the horizon blurred by tropical haze. The sonar operators aboard England were alert, scanning continuously. At midday, they caught the faint trace of RO-108. The submarine was attempting to escape eastward. Pendleton's voice came calm through the intercom. Steady course, engage. Another hedgehog pattern, another eruption. At 15:14 hours, an immense underwater explosion shattered the calm sea. The crew on deck felt the concussion in their chests. Then came the sight: oil, fragments, and a spreading slick. RO-108 had been sunk. In 13 days, the USS England had destroyed 6 submarines: RO-104, RO-106, RO-108, RO-105, ETA-16, and RO-107. It was a feat unmatched in naval history, not just by a destroyer escort, but by any warship of the Second World War. Each engagement had followed the same ritual precision: sonar contact, plot intercept, hedgehog launch, explosion, oil slick. But the pattern belied the raw human strain behind it. The England's crew had gone nearly 2 weeks without real rest. The men were exhausted, their nerves tight as wire. They had lived on coffee, adrenaline, and instinct. Each attack demanded hours of concentration. Each new contact brought both excitement and dread. Chief sonarman Ross Miller later described it. You'd sit there with your headphones listening for that ping. Every sound in the ocean could be something trying to kill you. The Pacific was littered with wrecks, each one marking the end of a crew's story. The England sailors knew it. They had sent over 200 men to the bottom in less than a fortnight. War had become mechanical, cold, efficient. Yet, amid that mechanical rhythm, there was brilliance. The England's success was not luck. It was the culmination of doctrine, intelligence, and relentless training. The destroyer escort represented the marriage of American industry and innovation. A vessel built for one purpose: to hunt and kill submarines. Her sonar gear and the QGB-1 could track submarines with surprising precision. Her hedgehog mortar allowed her to attack without losing sonar contact. Her compact hull made her nimble, allowing rapid turns and repeat runs. Combined with ultra-intercepts, the England was not hunting blindly. She was executing coordinated strikes guided by real-time intelligence. Each kill fed back into the Allied system, refining patterns, improving tactics, sharpening the spear point of naval warfare. By the time she returned to base, England was no longer just another destroyer escort. She was a legend. When the tally reached 6, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, sent a personal message. There's no one who can top the England, and none ever did. Her record stood unmatched. Even the larger fleet destroyers, armed with heavier ordnance and more experience, never achieved such a streak. It was as if the USS England had found her destiny in those 2 weeks of May 1944, to hunt, destroy, and disappear back into the ocean, leaving behind a trail of shattered steel and silence. But beneath the headlines and commendations, another story brewed quietly. The Japanese submarine command, already strained by losses, now faced collapse. The Imperial Navy had built its picket line to serve as an early warning network. 6 submarines lost in a single stretch not only crippled their numbers, but exposed the fragility of their strategy. Each sunk vessel represented more than metal. It was the death of reconnaissance, the blindness of an empire. The Japanese Navy could no longer see what was coming, and what was coming was the full, relentless might of the Allied Pacific offensive. As England steamed toward Espiritu Santo for refit, the crew finally allowed themselves to rest. The decks were silent. Men leaned against bulkheads, staring out at the endless horizon. They had become part of something far greater than they could fully comprehend. A small ship in a vast war, performing a task whose consequences rippled across oceans. The Pacific War was far from over. But for 2 weeks in May 1944, one small American ship had changed the balance beneath the waves. And that victory, precise, brutal, and total, would echo through naval history for generations. The legend of the USS England had been written in steel and saltwater, and its aftermath would reshape how both navies fought, planned, and thought about the silent war below the surface. The last explosions fade into the depths, replaced by the quiet sound of waves lapping against the hull, a deceptive peace after weeks of relentless hunting. That peace, however, carried its own consequences, ones that would ripple through both American and Japanese strategy. By the time USS England returned to Pavuvu for refitting, word of her achievements had already spread across the Pacific. Messages came flooding in from command posts, radio stations, and destroyer flotillas. The name England became synonymous with precision, courage, and lethal efficiency. But for the crew, the celebration was subdued. They had spent nearly 2 weeks in constant action, stalking, attacking, killing. The sound of the sonar ping, once their rhythm of survival, now echoed in their minds even as they slept. Some described it as a ringing in the ears that never stopped. Others said the silence was worse. The strategic shock when the reports reached Tokyo, the loss of 6 submarines in less than 2 weeks sent shockwaves through the Imperial Navy. Those 6 subs, RO-104, RO-105, RO-106, RO-107, RO-108, and I-16, had formed a key part of the Japanese picket line network. Their mission had been to detect and report on Allied invasion forces moving toward the Mariana Islands and Solomon Sea. Their destruction wasn't merely tactical, and it was strategic blindness. For the first time, Japanese planners realized that their early warning system had been completely dismantled. Every surviving submarine was ordered to retreat, breaking the chain that once stretched across the Pacific. This intelligence vacuum had catastrophic timing. Just 3 weeks later, the Allies launched Operation Forager, the invasion of the Marianas, including Saipan, Guam, and Tinian. Without their picket subs, the Japanese Navy had no advance warning. Their carriers and land-based aircraft were caught off guard, unable to prepare or intercept in time. In that sense, the England's 13-day campaign didn't just sink submarines. It helped blind the Japanese Empire at the very moment the United States was preparing its largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. A destroyer, Escort, a ship designed merely to guard convoys, had altered the trajectory of an ocean-wide campaign, the human weight of success despite the accolades. The crew of the England didn't see themselves as heroes. When interviewed later, many of them reflected less on triumph and more on the surreal detachment that came from such repeated victories. Sonarman Ross Miller described it years later. "We were just doing the job. You don't think about the men inside those subs. You just do what you're trained to do." Yet deep down they knew what each explosion meant. 200 or more men, Japanese sailors, many no older than they were, had died without ever seeing their killers. In the quiet hours between patrols, some men would stand at the rail staring into the black water where oil slicks still shimmered faintly. It was a strange feeling, triumph mixed with unease. But they didn't speak of it much. War didn't allow time for reflection. U.S. Naval Command's reaction, the Navy's response, however, was unequivocal. The England's feat became a case study in naval warfare. After action reports from her commanding officers, Lieutenant Commander Walton B. Pendleton and Lieutenant J.G. William C. Smith, the ship's executive officer, were distributed to fleet commands across the Pacific. Their reports detailed attack procedures, sonar patterns, and hedgehog engagement tactics with surgical precision. Naval training schools soon began citing England as a model of how destroyer escorts should operate: lean, disciplined, and aggressive. For the Bureau of Ships, the England validated the hedgehog system, which had been met with skepticism before the war. Many officers had favored traditional depth charges, believing them more powerful, but the England's results proved that accuracy and persistence mattered more than explosive weight. Each hedgehog salvo had been a small cluster of contact-fused projectiles. They exploded only upon hitting a target. That allowed sonar operators to keep the submarine tracked throughout the attack, instead of losing contact amid the turbulence of a depth charge pattern. In essence, the England had turned submarine hunting from an act of guesswork into a calculated science. The intelligence factor one of the quiet heroes of the England's campaign wasn't aboard the ship at all. It was FRUPAC, the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, based in Hawaii. Using decrypted Japanese messages, FRUPAC analysts were able to pinpoint the approximate positions and mission profiles of the enemy submarines the England hunted. That intelligence allowed Pendleton's ship to be at the right place, at the right time again and again. This cooperation between signals intelligence and naval operations was a microcosm of what would define Allied success in the latter half of the war. A seamless fusion of information, technology, and firepower. The England was the visible blade of an invisible weapon, the codebreakers who read Japan's secrets. Without that synergy, her legendary run might never have happened. Recognition and commendation. When England docked at Manus Island for overhaul, the crew was greeted not by ceremony, but by silence and exhaustion. It wasn't until weeks later, when dispatches from Washington reached the South Pacific, that the full magnitude of what they'd done became official. Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, sent a brief but powerful message. There's no one who can top the England. It became both a praise and a prophecy, for no one ever did. Later, the ship received the Presidential Unit Citation, awarded for extraordinary heroism in action against enemy forces. Every man aboard shared in that honor. The message they received during the ceremony was simple. In your 2-week operation, you have done your duty, and more. A symbol of doctrine. The England's record reinforced a key doctrine emerging within the U.S. Navy. That control of the sea required control beneath it. Destroyer escorts, once dismissed as secondary ships, mere convoy shepherds, had proven themselves decisive instruments of strategy. Their ability to hunt submarines, protect merchant lanes, and perform independent patrols made them indispensable in the Pacific and Atlantic alike. The England's success became a morale catalyst for other DE crews across the fleet. The name circulated like a talisman, a reminder that even the smallest ships could shape the course of war. The fate of her target's post-war analysis would reveal the stark details of her 6 victims. RO-106, sunk May 11, 1944, depth 1,700 fathoms, RO-104, sunk May 13, 1944, RO-116 I-16, sunk May 19, 1944, while attempting to resupply Japanese forces. RO-105, RO-107, RO-108, all lost between May 9 to 18, 1944. Each submarine was found to have gone down with all hands. For decades, their wrecks would remain undiscovered, silent graves scattered across the deep Pacific, untouched by human light. A navy transformed. By mid-1944, the tide of war had turned completely. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, just a month after England's patrol, destroyed Japan's carrier air arm in what came to be called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The blindfold that England had helped place over Japan's eyes ensured that their response to the Allied invasion was delayed, disorganized, and ultimately disastrous. In this way, a single destroyer escort had contributed, indirectly, yet decisively, to one of the turning points of the Pacific War. It proved that in modern conflict, even the smallest victories of precision could cascade into strategic avalanches. The waves rolled gently against the England's hull as she rested at anchor, the sounds of hammers and paintbrushes replacing those of depth charges. The crew, now allowed brief shore leave, began to process what they'd been through, the exhaustion, the fear, the strange calm after the storm. But history would not leave them in peace for long, because even as they rested, orders were already being drafted. The England was to return to action. Her next mission would not be against submarines, but against the fury of the Japanese air fleet, and in that new arena, she would again be tested, this time not as a hunter, but as the hunted. By late 1944, the USS England had completed repairs and resupply at Manus. Her hull bore the scars of relentless service, salt-worn, streaked with rust and pitted from long exposure to the Pacific. Yet below the surface of steel and rivets, her crew carried a different kind of wear, the invisible fatigue of men who had seen too much, too fast. Their 13-day rampage against the Imperial Japanese Navy's submarines was over, but war had not finished with them. The next orders were clear: escort operations and radar picket duty in the Philippines, as part of the sweeping campaign to reclaim the islands. From hunter to target by May 1945, the England was assigned to radar picket duty off Okinawa, one of the most dangerous assignments in the Pacific War. Her new role placed her at the outer perimeter of the U.S. fleet, scanning the sky for kamikaze aircraft and reporting incoming waves. It was a grim reversal of roles. The ship that had once hunted unseen enemies beneath the waves was now the target of unseen death from above. Kamikaze attacks had become Japan's desperate final weapon. Pilots, many barely trained, flew aircraft loaded with explosives directly into Allied ships. The picket destroyers, small, maneuverable, and isolated, bore the brunt of this suicidal storm. On May 9, 1945, exactly 1 year after her legendary anti-submarine campaign, England's luck finally broke. The attack that morning, her radar detected a small group of enemy aircraft approaching low over the horizon. The ship went to general quarters. Gun crews manned their stations, the smell of gun oil and cordite thick in the air. At 800 hours, a Japanese dive bomber, a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy, appeared through the clouds, heading straight for the ship. The England's anti-aircraft guns erupted in fire, tracers streaking through the sky. The Judy took hits, trailing smoke, but it didn't veer away. It came on, unwavering. At the last moment, the pilot leveled out and slammed his aircraft directly into England's starboard side, between the number 1 and number 2 engine rooms. The explosion was catastrophic. Flames burst through the compartments. Shrapnel tore through the decks. Power failed instantly. Within minutes, the engine rooms were engulfed. Men rushed to contain the fires, hauling hoses through blinding smoke. The ship listed as seawater poured in through ruptured bulkheads. But despite the devastation, England did not sink. Her crew, battle-hardened and disciplined, fought the flames for 12 straight hours. When the fires finally subsided, the destroyer escort was crippled but alive. 6 men had been killed. 8 others were badly wounded. For a ship that had destroyed 6 submarines in 13 days, it was a bitter symmetry. The end of service badly damaged, England was towed to Karama-Retto and later to San Francisco for full assessment. There, naval engineers surveyed the wreckage of her engine rooms and declared the verdict no sailor wanted to hear. Beyond economical repair, the war had evolved beyond her. Newer ships were already being launched, larger, faster, more heavily armed. And so, on October 15, 1945, USS England, D-635, was decommissioned. Her hull was later scrapped. But her story, her name, would never fade. Legacy and symbolism, in naval circles, England's campaign became more than history. It became a legend of precision warfare. She embodied a truth the U.S. Navy would carry forward into the Cold War, that technology, intelligence, and coordination could achieve miracles even with limited firepower. Her operations were studied by post-war strategists who recognized her as a blueprint for anti-submarine warfare, ASW doctrine. Future destroyers, from the Gearing class to the Submarines class, carried her DNA: sonar-guided weapon systems, quick-firing mortars, and integration with real-time intelligence. And in 1963, when the Navy launched a new guided missile destroyer escort, they gave it her name, USS England, DLG-22. That ship too would serve with distinction, through Vietnam, the Cold War, and beyond, carrying forward the spirit of the small ship that once changed the war. Remembering the crew of the 213 men who served aboard her during her most famous patrol, many returned home to quiet lives. Commander Pendleton, their captain during the May 1944 campaign, was awarded the Navy Cross. So was Lieutenant J.G. William C. Smith, who had coordinated many of the ship's attacks. Both men later credited not themselves, but their crew, the sonarmen, the gunners, the electricians, the cooks, who had kept the ship moving and fighting through exhaustion and fear. In reunions decades later, survivors often recalled the sound of the hedgehogs, the brief whine before the splash, and the tense silence before the explosion. For them, it was the sound of history being made. Japanese reflections on the other side of the Pacific. Post-war interviews with Japanese naval officers revealed their astonishment at England's efficiency. The commander of the 6th Fleet, which oversaw submarine operations, described the 2-week campaign as a single thread unraveling a whole tapestry. The loss of the picket line had crippled Japanese situational awareness, just as the Allies advanced on the Marianas. It demonstrated to Tokyo's high command that no defensive network could withstand Allied code-breaking and coordination. It was one of the many moments when the Imperial Navy's confidence, once boundless, began to fracture beyond repair. The unseen. Cost even in victory, the England's campaign raised uncomfortable truths. Each submarine she destroyed carried between 50 and 80 men. None survived. That meant nearly 400 sailors perished in the depths, unseen and unburied. For the crew of the England, those numbers eventually became haunting. They had fought a clean, efficient war, but beneath the statistics lay the grim human cost. In interviews decades later, sonar operator Ross Miller reflected, "We didn't hate them, we never saw them, but we knew what the job meant. Every explosion meant someone's sons weren't coming home." That quiet understanding, that victory carried weight, became part of the England's enduring legend. She represented not just precision, but the paradox of modern warfare. Success measured by destruction. The broader impact strategically. England's success accelerated. Allied control over the Pacific's undersea war. Her record proved that Japanese submarine strategy, one which emphasized offensive raiding and picket surveillance, was obsolete against modern sonar and intelligence coordination. By late 1944, U.S. submarines dominated the Pacific, cutting Japan's supply lines and isolating its island garrisons. The England's two-week patrol was part of that larger tide, one that quietly but decisively ensured Japan's defeat. Her efficiency became a microcosm of the American approach to warfare by that stage, information-driven, industrially powered, and ruthlessly systematic. A ship remembered today. Her name is engraved in the annals of U.S. naval history alongside the great carriers and battleships, a rare honor for a destroyer escort. In naval museums and archives, her photographs still draw visitors. Her story continues to be told in documentaries, war colleges, and classrooms. The phrase "sink 6 in 13 days" has become shorthand for precision and discipline, proof of what a well-trained crew and sound doctrine can achieve even under relentless pressure. In the Pacific, thousands of feet below the waves, the wrecks of RO-104 through RO-108 and I-16 still rest, silent, corroded, their hulls entombed in silt and coral. Above them, ships still pass, merchant vessels, cargo haulers, and Navy fleets, tracing the same routes once contested in fire and steel. The ocean has forgotten the noise, but the history remains. The USS England may have been scrapped, her decks long gone, but in the quiet mathematics of naval warfare, she remains undefeated. No other ship has matched her record. None ever will. The waves roll softly against the memory of her hull, the sound fading into the timeless hush of the Pacific, a silence that once hid the deadliest hunter the sea ever knew. And from that silence, history moves forward, toward lessons, reflection, and meaning beyond the numbers. Because the legacy of the USS England was never just about what she destroyed. It was about what she revealed, the future of warfare itself. The story of the USS England does not end with her decommissioning, or even with the wreckage that lay quietly in a scrapyard years later. It endures, in steel, in memory, and in the doctrine of naval warfare. Her 13-day campaign in May 1944 became one of those rare moments when a single ship's actions transcended the battlefield and entered the timeless study of strategy itself. Because what England achieved was more than destruction. She demonstrated the future, the dawn of intelligent warfare before England. Submarine hunting had been as much art as science, dependent on instinct, experience, and luck. But what she represented was the fusion of intelligence, technology, and human precision. Every submarine she sank had first been located by signals analysts thousands of miles away, working quietly in sealed rooms over intercepted Japanese communications. Their decrypts gave Pendleton's crew the positions and movements of Japan's submarines before the enemy even knew it was being hunted. It was this invisible hand and the cooperation between cryptology and combat that changed the war's undersea dimension. Forever, England was the executioner, But the mind guiding her came from the intelligence community, and in that partnership lay the birth of a new kind of warfare, one ruled not only by weapons and courage, but by information. The men behind the machine. The destroyer escort was only as good as the men aboard her. They were not elite commandos or celebrated fighter pilots. They were mostly young, many under 20, drawn from towns and cities across America. Farm boys, machinists, college dropouts, mechanics. In the tight metal corridors of England, they became something more, a living system. Every sonar ping depended on the precision of a listener. Every hedgehog launch depended on trust between captain and crew. They did not see the faces of the men they killed. They did not hear the screams of a sinking submarine. Their war existed in sound waves and explosions, a detached, mechanical kind of killing. And yet, they bore its weight like soldiers in the trenches, silently, without complaint. They were the human pulse inside the machine age of war. The balance between mercy and efficiency. Looking back, historians often describe England's patrol as clinical, precise, and ruthlessly efficient. Those words, while accurate, hide a deeper truth, the moral paradox of modern combat. In the days of sail and cannon, sailors could see their enemies, faces, flags, the colors of uniforms. War was visceral. By 1944, it had become mathematical. The England never once saw her enemies. She fought them through echoes, calculated vectors, and instantaneous detonations. It was clean, efficient, and absolute. And in that transformation lay a question that still lingers in military ethics. When warfare becomes perfect, when killing becomes effortless, what happens to humanity? For the men aboard England, the answer was found not in pride but in quiet humility. They celebrated their victory, yes, but they also understood what it meant. Each oil slick on the surface was not just a mark of triumph. It was a grave. Echoes of the Pacific, the sea where England fought, remains vast and indifferent. If one sails those same coordinates today, there are no signs of the war and only water and sky. Yet beneath those waters, history sleeps. The wrecks of the 6 submarines she destroyed still lie there, twisted and rusting, untouched since 1944. Each is a capsule of a vanished world, steel coffins filled with the remains of sailors who never knew the name of the ship that ended their lives. Time has covered them in coral and silence. Nature, indifferent as always, has reclaimed the ruins of empire and war, and perhaps that is fitting. Because England's victory was never personal. It was part of a larger movement of history, a tide that carried both victors and vanquished alike toward an inevitable end. Lessons that endure. When war colleges and naval academies study the Pacific Campaign, England's record is still cited as the textbook example of tactical perfection. 6 kills. No losses, no damage. 2 weeks. Every engagement following standard operating procedure. Every strike a confirmation of doctrine working exactly as designed. That level of precision remains astonishing, not just for 1944, but even by modern standards, and it raises an important truth. The most powerful weapon in war is not the missile or the gun, it is discipline. The England's men trusted their instruments, their training, and each other. They did not improvise recklessly. They executed calmly, methodically, like surgeons in steel uniforms. That discipline, not fury, not revenge, is what won them immortality. The power of the ordinary. There is something deeply human in the England's legacy. She was not a grand carrier like Enterprise, nor a mighty battleship like Iowa. She was small, functional, unglamorous, built to escort convoys and defend transports. And yet through that ordinariness, she achieved the extraordinary. In her story lies one of the quiet lessons of history. Greatness often emerges not from strength or fame, but from preparation, precision, and purpose. The England's crew didn't set out to make history. They simply did their job imperfectly. Technology, doctrine, and the future in the decades that followed. The England spirit lived on through evolution, not memory alone. Her victories prove that small, specialized ships could dominate undersea warfare. That idea shaped the Cold War Navy, where fleets of agile frigates and destroyers hunted Soviet submarines across the Atlantic and Pacific. Her sonar methods became the foundation for ASW, anti-submarine warfare doctrine. Her tactics, coordination of sonar bearings, depth charge sequences, and constant contact maintenance, were codified into manuals still referenced today. In that sense, England never died. She was absorbed into every navy that learned from her. Even modern naval AI systems and sonar. Drones trace their lineage. Back to that single lesson, the perfect hunt is not luck, it's information and timing, the ghost of a ship. On quiet evenings in naval reunions long after the war, surviving crewmen would sometimes talk about her, not as a vessel, but as if she were a living being. She took care of us, one sailor said. She knew what to do. It was a superstition shared by many who served at sea, the belief that ships develop a spirit of their own. Perhaps it wasn't superstition. Perhaps a ship like England, forged in steel and tested in fire, does earn a kind of soul. Her name lives on in plaques, citations, and another ship that bore her flag. But more than that, she lives in the idea that excellence in war does not require glory, only mastery. A symbol of its time, the England's brief, blazing career was a microcosm of America's war in the Pacific, a convergence of overwhelming industrial power, innovative technology, and human endurance. In just 2 years, she had gone from blueprints on a table to a weapon that rewrote naval history, and in another year she was gone, sacrificed to a war that consumed even its heroes. Her story, in that way, mirrors the era itself, an age of speed, destruction, and transformation. The world that emerged from that war would never be the same, neither would the ocean. The meaning of victory when the guns finally fell silent in 1945. The men who had served aboard ships like England went home to a country already moving toward peace and prosperity. They didn't speak much of what they'd done. They returned to families, farms, factories. Their medals went into drawers. Their stories became quiet memories. But every so often, when the sea was calm and the night long, they remembered the sound of sonar, the faint ping that had once meant life or death. They remembered the long nights in the Pacific, the smell of diesel and salt, the thrum of engines, and the feeling of standing at the edge of the world. And in that silence, perhaps they understood the true meaning of what they had achieved. Not fame, not glory, but duty carried out with absolute precision. Closing words today. When naval historians speak of the England, they often call her the destroyer that changed the ocean. But perhaps a better title is simpler. The ship that proved excellence needs no audience. She fought quietly, killed efficiently, and disappeared humbly, like a shadow passing through the sea. Her legacy endures not because of her size, but because of what she represented: discipline, intelligence, teamwork, and the relentless pursuit of mastery. In an age where machines and data now dominate warfare, the lesson of England still resonates, that behind every algorithm, every sonar ping, every missile launch, there must still be men and women with courage and clarity of purpose. Because technology may win battles, but human precision wins wars. The camera pans over the Pacific, calm, endless, indifferent. The sun sets, staining the horizon with gold. Beneath that vast water, 6 submarines rest in silence. Above it, the name USS England drifts on the wind, a whisper of steel and history, a reminder that sometimes, in the darkest depths of war, brilliance is born not from might, but from mastery.